The women's liberation movement took place mainly during the 1960s through the 1970s. Over time, women have fought for and gained the rights to many things, such as the right to own property, suffrage, reproductive rights, and equal pay. The movement of the 60s and 70s focused mostly on workplace inequality, fighting for dismantling the patriarchy and personal equality. The movement was very divided between young and old, upper class and lower class, and conservative and radical.
The goals of this movement were that women didn't want to hurt men or the system. They just wanted to open it up to women. The movement also wanted women to have control over their relationships, sexuality, their body and birth control, clothing and body image, roles in marriage, housework, and childcare. It took thousands of women protesters marching in the streets to demonstrate that one person can make a difference.
Over time, three major movements took place. The first movement was called the women's suffrage movement. This movement focused on allowing women the right to vote. This ended with the 19th Amendment allowing women to vote. The second movement was called the women's liberation movement. This one focused on issues of equality and discrimination. This resulted in many laws and changes for women. The third movement was known for going off the second movement, and it focused on the errors and failed attempts.
Before the women's liberation movement, women were expected to devote their lives to their family and household. This meant getting married, having and taking care of children, as well as taking care of their home. The average woman spent about 55 hours a week raising their children and doing household chores. Women were forced to do what men wanted because of the head and master law. This law made it so when women got married, they were legally their husband's property and had no right to their money and or possessions. Divorce was not an option, as many women would be required to prove that there was a problem on the man's part.
Another struggle of life beforehand was that only 38% of women worked in the 1960s. If they did work, their only options were being a teacher, nurse, or secretary. Women were forced out of any other jobs because the workplace was afraid that women would get pregnant and have to quit or take time off. Some women did go into other professions. Women made up 6% of doctors, 3% of lawyers, and 1% of engineers. These women were often paid much less than the men they worked with. In the 1960s, women's pay was 60% of men's. They were also never offered opportunities to move up. Many women were feeling unsatisfied with their lives and didn't know how to explain it.
Many things came from the years that women fought for equal rights. Starting in 1960, birth control was approved and accepted by the Food and Drug Administration, made widely available in 1961, but not yet legalized nationally until 1965. Also, in 1964, women fought for an anti-discrimination law to be added to and passed to the Civil Rights Act. This law was not passed until 1972, and the law was rarely enforced. Next, in 1966, a group of women created the National Organization for Women, also known as the NOW. Later, in 1973, abortions became legal under Roe v. Wade. Not until 1979 was the head and master law removed in all states, making women free from their husband's control. One huge win for women was in 1980 when sexual harassment was legally defined as a crime and people could be charged for it. Then, in 1981, divorce and custody battles were made fair for women. Lastly, following this in 1982, the NOW group created the Take Back the Night March to spread awareness and stop sexual assault.
For all these important changes to happen, women had to fight very hard. For birth control to become legal and widely spread, the women's health movement created a women-centered health system. They went to homes, daycares, churches, set up women's clinics, and published information books to spread awareness. The movement also had to use lawsuits and formal complaints to create legal change.
After the fight for birth control to be legal, women all over the U.S. started taking it. They decided to do this because they could complete years of schooling, working, without worry of getting pregnant. The opening of birth control made the sexual revolution possible for women, which helped break down the double standard on sexual activities for women and men. Because of the double standard being slowly taken down, abortion became legal. Women fought for control of their bodies by holding speak-outs where they shared their experiences along with stories of illegal actions and the dangers of them. These speak-outs also brought up and spread awareness to sexual assault. They set up crisis centers, support groups for survivors, and they pushed for police departments and hospitals to treat survivors better. The reproductive rights fight overall brought a new group and social class of women together.
The true change for women was the passing and enforcing of the anti-discrimination law. After this happened, higher education became much more available to women, which caused the proportion of women in skilled jobs to go up 30%. Child death rates went down as well, and school enrollment spending increased. Eventually, women's numbers in politics improved as women consistently ran for office. For all of this to change, women had to devote years to their cause. They held protests, speak-outs, fought in courts, hunger strikes, and created their own organizations. In small groups and communities, women started sharing their stories about family life, education, and work. This helped women build bonds, find comparisons, and make the movement stronger.
While the women's liberation movement was occurring, many other events were also happening. A major event was the civil rights movement, starting in 1954 and ending in 1968. This movement affected many people's lives. Black women were fighting for equality among the gender and race.
Black women were crucial for both movements but were denied most leadership opportunities. With a new voting population, reproductive rights, higher education and jobs, and family services became more important. African American suffragists worked tirelessly for their gender and race equality. Seeing how this movement handled the topic of equality made women think it was possible to be equal to men. Due to the civil rights movement excluding women, it made women want to start their own movement. This movement also provided women leadership opportunities and social justice to people of color.
Across the world, many countries also had women fighting for suffrage, encouraging the U.S. to do the same. World War II was happening at the same time, and because of this, women were needed in the workforce to fill the jobs that men used to do. This allowed women to realize they could do anything a man can do.
During the women's rights movement, many women took leadership roles and helped the movement drastically. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was known for her fight in gender discrimination. She was the first female member of Harvard Law Review. She directed the influential women's rights project of the American Civil Liberties Union during the 1970s. She wrote an opinion in the United States versus Virginia, saying women could attend Virginia Military Institute. She strongly fought for and believed that women needed to be treated the same as men.
Some other important women in the movement were Alice Paul, who worked towards passing an equal rights amendment. This amendment was not ratified by enough states because people were worried about wages and work conditions changing. Maud Wood Park was the first president of the League of Women's Voters and helped from the Women's Joint Congressional Committee, which helped women's group in Congress. These groups supported providing money and support for women after pregnancy.
Mary Bethune helped African American women vote by helping them with literacy tests and paying for poll taxes. At one point, she was the highest ranking African American in the government. During the Great Depression, Rose Schneiderman provided relief for unemployed women workers. She also improved working conditions and helped cover women for Social Security.
Betty Friedman was a key person in the second wave of feminism, writing many books of women's feelings. Emma Goldman was arrested more than 40 times for sharing her ideas about female sexuality and birth control. Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were part of the Women Denied from the Women's Anti-Slavery Convention. These women later hosted the women's rights movement. As a result of the marches that women took on, we now have a Women's Day that is celebrated internationally on March 8th. The Voting Rights Act in 1965 has raised voting numbers and more people of color run for office. Even today, Black women have had some of the highest turnout rates for elections. The act also allowed non-English speakers opportunities to vote.
By the 1970s, organizations changed things like outlawing gender discrimination in education, college sports, and financial credit. They also tried making control over women's body and birth control legal, as well as making divorce easier and allowing women to have a chance at property during divorce.
Today, women make up half the workforce thanks to the increase of women's rights. On August 26th, women celebrate the right to vote.